Richard Vitale, our Chief of Homicide, Adrian Lynch, the Chief of our Cold Case Unit, Dave Sollett, and Assistant District Attorney, Jamie Charles. This is a very bittersweet day because just over half a century ago, on June 10th, 1971, Natalie Scheublin, who was then a 54-year-old wife and mother, was violently murdered in her own home in Bedford. Today, we were able to call her son and daughter and tell them that we were taking the first step in holding to account the alleged perpetrator. This morning, a Middlesex County grand jury indicted Arthur Massey, age 76, on the charge of first-degree murder in connection with tying up Natalie Scheublin, stabbing her multiple times, and then striking her in the head, causing her death. We know that in the early evening of Thursday, June 10th, 1971, Natalie's husband, Raymond Scheublin, the president of the Lexington Trust Bank, returned from work to find the body of his wife in the basement of the home. Mrs. Scheublin was face down on the floor, her ankles were tied together, and there was a makeshift gag around her neck. Mr. Scheublin immediately called the Bedford Police Department, and officers were there within minutes. Based on the state of her body, it appeared that Mrs. Scheublin had only been dead for a short time. An autopsy subsequently determined that Mrs. Scheublin had been stabbed with a knife multiple times and struck with an unidentified object, which caused a massive blunt force injury to her head. Nothing of significant value was taken from the home, but what was missing was Mrs. Scheublin's car, a blue and white 1969 Chevrolet Impala. On the day of the murder, police immediately began canvassing the area, interviewing neighbors, and looking for that car. By 8:42 p.m. on June 10th, the police had found the car in the parking lot of the nearby VA hospital, less than half a mile from the Scheublin home. Although the car appeared to have been intentionally wiped down to remove fingerprints, police were able to observe and collect several latent prints from it, including one from the passenger side back window. Police at the time followed several leads, but were not able to identify a suspect. That investigation continued, and then in 1999, fingerprint examiners from the Massachusetts State Police used what was then a new tool, the FBI's automated fingerprint identification system, known to many of you as AFIS, to attempt to identify that print that had been found on the Impala and the other latent prints that had been found at the crime scene. Through AFIS, they were able to identify the defendant, Mr. Massey, as a candidate for review. A subsequent analysis of the print from the car window by state police fingerprint expert confirmed that that print recovered from the victim's car matched the defendant's left thumb. Police then interviewed Mr. Massey, who denied ever having been in Bedford or having any knowledge of the murder. Over the course of the investigation, police had occasion to speak to Mr. Massey again. At that time, he allegedly claimed that he had been solicited by an organized crime associate to murder the wife of a banker and to make the murder look like a break-in. He claimed that he had turned down that job that was offered to him. I want to be clear that throughout this investigation, evidence have found nothing to corroborate that Mr. Scheublin ever put out a contract on his wife or was in any way involved in his wife's death. That is merely the story that police were told by Mr. Massey. Police continued to pursue potential leads, looking at similar crimes and a range of suspects. The police during that time, and this is partly how we were able to get to where we are today, they were meticulous about documenting tips and leads and following initial forensic leads, although obviously the technology we have today was not available in 1971. In 2019, following my creation of the cold case unit in this office, we again focused on this case. Throughout 2020 and 2021, Massachusetts State Police troopers, as well as the Bedford detectives, carefully examined the case, gathered information about the defendant's past, and sought to identify additional witnesses. During the course of this wide-ranging investigation, the police were able to identify a woman who admitted that she had been involved with Massey in schemes to defraud banks during the 1990s. She told the police that Mr. Massey habitually carried a knife and that he had bragged to her that he had previously killed someone with a knife. That information, along with other facts developed during the investigation, was presented to the Middlesex grand jury, which returned that indictment for murder today. This situation, being able to go to a family over 50 years later and tell them that we have taken the first step in holding someone accountable, that we have kept our promise that we will never give up, is exactly what we envisioned when I created the cold case unit in 2019. Putting our resources into a case, meticulously examining every detail and seeing what else can be done. In this case, our investigators poured through old records, developed information, and this indictment today is truly the culmination of years of investigative work. I am truly grateful, as is the family, and they've asked me to express that gratitude to all of the law enforcement partners who worked tirelessly to ensure that we would get to this day. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Fong, then I'll be happy to take some questions, but I would note that in speaking to Mrs. Scheublin's son and daughter, they have asked, obviously this comes as news that is both welcome and a great surprise, and they have asked that their privacy be respected.